Hi, Gerhardt Bloom, looking at the tyranny and the delusions of the social justice movement. So I know you've been told incessantly that Islam is a religion of peace. Deluded leftists continue to foist this absolute lie on you. And I undoubtedly they believe it because, of course, the vast majority of Muslims are people of color, ergo they must be oppressed and they must be virtuous angels. Well, let's look at Islam for a minute. Islam comes from the Arabic word for submission. Islam means submission. It is war, jihad, until the world and you submits. That's right. Islam is fanaticism in religious garb, right? It's fascism in religious garb. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and numerous other Muslim terrorist groups are all deeply concerned with religious rectitude. They ensure that their activities, as malevolent and evil as they are consistent with the teachings in the Quran and the Hadith and the Sirah. They are following the example of Muhammad, the venerated prophet. He saw it as his highest duty to spread Islam by the sword, and he did exactly that. Muhammad was no Christ, a poor prophet in sandals, preaching peace, love, and tolerance, and forgiveness. Right? This is something, of course, the leftists have nothing to do with, forgiveness. And just as the figure of Christ represents the embodiment of moral perfection for Christians, Muhammad represents the same ideal for Muslims. The Quran explicitly calls upon the believer to conduct themselves following the example Muhammad set. The medieval barbarism that one finds common in the Muslim world and increasingly in the West is explained by the fact that Muhammad himself explicitly endorsed these practices or perpetrated them himself. How could ISIS possibly justify sexually enslaving young Yazidi girls? Well, because no less an authority than Muhammad had sex slaves. And he also passed around captive women to his companions to be raped. That's why. Religiously motivated killings, assassinations, torturing people, sawing off of limbs, beheading of captives. Not just ISIS, yes, Muhammad himself engaged in these practices. As one example among many, Muhammad and his crimes against humanity, he and his lovely young wife, and by young I mean 12 years old, his wife Aisha, spent a lazy afternoon together in Medina, enjoying the spectacle of 800 Jews having their heads cut off for the sole crime of denying that Muhammad was the prophet of Allah. All of these medieval practices, if those weren't enough to warrant concern, Muhammad's successors were explicitly given the task of pursuing the war of the righteous. That's right, jihad. It remains a standing religious duty for all Muslims to engage in jihad. It's important to note that fighting for the cause of Islam can and does take many functions. This includes proselytizing, yes, spreading the word, funding, and the use of deceit and lying, as well as militant violence. This is all jihad. You have, Muslim apologists on TV and on the radio and on podcasts, talking about how peaceful Islam is and how it's being misinterpreted. They are lying. This is sacred deceit, and it's authorized in Islam explicitly. Yes, this sacred deceit, it's taqiyya, and if it furthers the interest of Islamic justice and spreading Islam, it's endorsed. So this explains these lying Muslim apologists. They are lying about the basic tenets of their faith. And of course, you have no way of knowing. So you think that when somebody like me speaks out, oh, I must not understand Islam. Wrong. I spent countless hours studying this poisonous ideology. I hope you'll check out my book. You know, the ultimate aim for the true believer is nothing less than the world governed by Sharia and following the example of Muhammad. It and Europe, the lights of freedom are going dark in Europe. Islam is taking over that continent. I hope you'll check out my book, Deconstructing Social Justice, available on Amazon. And yes, I bring the receipts. I will walk you through this poisonous ideology and explain the truth about this. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Bye-bye.